Have you ever noticed that the people who tell you you're thinking too much are often the same people who never stop reacting? They move quickly, they speak confidently, they make decisions without hesitation. And for a while, it makes you wonder if something is wrong with you. Maybe you should stop analyzing everything. Maybe you should trust your instincts more. Maybe life would be easier if you simply stopped asking so many questions. But what if the problem isn't that you think too deeply? What if the real problem is that the modern world was never designed for people who refuse to live on the surface? Most people move through life looking only at what is obvious. A deep-thinking man notices what isn't obvious. He pays attention to the silence after someone speaks. He notices the emotion hidden behind confidence. He sees patterns where others see coincidence. He asks questions long after everyone else believes they already have the answer. That kind of mind is often misunderstood. People call it overthinking. They call it being complicated. Some even mistake it for insecurity. But depth and insecurity are not the same thing. One comes from fear, the other comes from awareness, and awareness has always carried a price. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Think about that for a moment. Your thoughts are not just passing ideas, they shape the person you become. So if your mind naturally searches for meaning instead of distraction, if you instinctively look beneath appearances instead of accepting them, perhaps your greatest challenge is not learning how to think less. Perhaps it is learning how to think well. Because there is a dangerous line between deep thinking and endless overthinking. One leads to wisdom, the other leads to exhaustion. The difference isn't intelligence, it's discipline. A mind without direction becomes its own prison. A disciplined mind becomes its greatest weapon. That's why some men become trapped inside their thoughts, while others use those same thoughts to build extraordinary lives. The difference is never how much they think, it's what they do with what they discover. In this world, speed is celebrated. Reflection is often mistaken for weakness. Quick answers receive applause. Careful judgment is called hesitation. But history has rarely been shaped by the people who reacted first. It has been shaped by those who saw what everyone else missed. If you spent your life feeling different, if you've ever been told that you care too much, notice too much, or think too deeply, this video isn't here to tell you to change who you are. It's here to help you understand why you are the way you are. Because once you understand your own mind, what once felt like a burden can become your greatest advantage. In this video, we'll explore the 7 truths about men who think too deep. Not myths, not internet cliches, but timeless truths about awareness, discipline, purpose, and self-mastery. And the first truth explains why deep thinking has very little to do with intelligence and everything to do with awareness. Truth number 1. Deep thinking begins with awareness, not intelligence. Most people assume that a man who thinks deeply must simply be more intelligent than everyone else. But intelligence isn't what separates a deep thinker from the crowd. Awareness is. There is a profound difference between knowing more and noticing more. A man can possess an extraordinary memory, solve complex equations, and speak with impressive vocabulary, yet still move through life without truly seeing what is happening around him. Another man may never call himself a genius, yet he quietly notices the smallest shift in someone's voice, the hesitation before an answer, the tension hidden behind a smile, or the pattern that keeps repeating beneath different situations. The second man isn't necessarily smarter, he's simply paying attention. That is where deep thinking begins. It begins the moment you realize that reality is rarely as simple as it first appears. While most people stop observing once they have an explanation, the deep thinking man keeps asking questions. What caused this? What am I missing? Why did that happen now instead of earlier? Is there another way to see this? His mind doesn't chase answers because it enjoys confusion. It searches because it respects complexity. Marcus Aurelius understood this better than most. He wrote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." A deep-thinking man naturally lives by this principle even if he has never read Meditations. He understands that first impressions are often incomplete. Strong emotions distort judgment. Confidence can disguise insecurity. Kindness can hide manipulation. Silence can mean wisdom or fear. Nothing reveals its full meaning at first glance. That awareness changes the way he moves through life. Instead of reacting immediately, he observes. Instead of assuming, he investigates. Instead of rushing towards certainty, he becomes comfortable sitting with uncertainty until the picture becomes clearer. To people who live on the surface, this can look like hesitation. They wonder why he doesn't answer immediately, why he pauses before making a decision, why he rarely jumps on trends or follows the loudest opinion in the room. What they fail to realize is that he isn't moving slowly because he's confused. He's moving carefully because he understands that every decision creates consequences long after the moment has passed. Modern culture praises speed, instant replies, instant opinions, instant confidence. But nature has never worked that way. The tallest trees spend years growing roots before anyone notices their height. The strongest foundations are buried where no one applauds them. Depth has always been invisible before it becomes obvious. That is why awareness often feels lonely. The more you notice, the more difficult it becomes to pretend that everything is simple. You begin to recognize patterns that others dismiss as coincidence. You notice when someone's words and actions no longer match. You recognize the cost behind every shortcut. You start seeing causes where others only see outcomes. Sometimes this feels like a burden. You may even wish your mind would become quieter, that you could simply enjoy life without questioning everything. But awareness itself is not the enemy. The real danger comes when awareness exists without direction. Without discipline, awareness becomes anxiety. Without purpose, observation becomes endless overthinking. Without action, insight becomes another weight the mind must carry. This is why the Stoics never encouraged people to stop thinking. They encouraged them to think with purpose. Epictetus reminded us, first learn the meaning of what you say, and then speak. Notice the order. Understanding comes before expression. Reflection comes before action. Wisdom comes before certainty. That is exactly how a deep-thinking man grows stronger. He doesn't try to silence his awareness. He learns to guide it. Because the goal is not to notice less. The goal is to notice what truly matters and let everything else go. And once a man develops that kind of awareness, something else begins to change. He no longer questions only the world around him. He begins questioning himself first. That is where real wisdom begins, and it leads us directly to the second truth.
Truth number 2. They question themselves before they question others. One of the greatest misconceptions about deep-thinking men is that they spend all their time analyzing other people. In reality, their toughest conversations happen long before they ever speak to anyone else. They happen inside their own minds. Before they question another person's motives, they question their own. Before they criticize someone else's decision, they examine whether they would have acted differently under the same circumstances. Before they defend an opinion, they ask themselves if they might be wrong. This isn't insecurity, it's intellectual honesty. Most people search for evidence that proves they are right. A deep-thinking man searches for evidence that proves he could be wrong. That single habit changes everything. It makes him slower to judge, more willing to listen, less interested in winning arguments, and far more interested in finding the truth. Seneca captured this mindset perfectly when he wrote, "If a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favorable." Many people read this quote as advice about having goals, but it also applies to the mind. If you never examine your own thinking, every new opinion feels convincing, every emotion feels like truth, every impulse demands action. Without an inner compass, your thoughts become slaves to your moods. A deep-thinking man refuses to live that way. He understands that the first story his mind tells him is not always the most accurate one. He knows how easily fear can disguise itself as caution, how pride can disguise itself as confidence, how resentment can disguise itself as justice, and how desire can disguise itself as love. That is why he doesn't immediately believe everything he thinks. Instead, he steps back. He observes his own mind, the same way a Stoic observes the world, with curiosity instead of blind obedience. This kind of self-examination requires humility, because it is uncomfortable to admit that your first reaction may be incomplete. It is much easier to blame someone else, much easier to defend your ego, much easier to assume that everyone around you is the problem. But wisdom rarely grows inside certainty. It grows inside honest reflection.
There's a reason Socrates famously declared, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Although Socrates was not a Stoic, his philosophy deeply influenced the Stoic tradition. The greatest battles are rarely fought against other people. They are fought against our own assumptions. Every time a deep-thinking man changes his mind after discovering better evidence, he becomes stronger, not weaker. Every time he admits he misunderstood a situation, his judgment becomes sharper, not smaller. This is why truly wise men rarely sound absolute. They leave room for possibility. They understand that reality is more complex than pride allows. Ironically, this willingness to question themselves often makes other people assume they lack confidence. But confidence isn't pretending to know everything. Confidence is being secure enough to admit when you don't. The loudest voice in the room is not always the wisest. Very often, the wisest man is the one still thinking while everyone else has already reached a conclusion. And yet, there is also a danger hidden inside this strength. A man who constantly examines every thought can eventually become trapped inside endless analysis. He keeps refining, keeps questioning, keeps preparing until action is endlessly postponed. The Stoics never believed that reflection alone was enough. Reflection exists to improve action, not replace it. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. There comes a moment when thinking must end, not because every question has been answered, but because wisdom demands movement. A deep-thinking man becomes truly powerful when he knows when to stop analyzing and start acting. And that ability begins with one simple discipline: learning that protecting your energy is often more valuable than protecting your image. That brings us to the third truth. Truth number 3. They protect their energy more than their image. One of the biggest differences between a man who thinks deeply and a man who simply wants approval is what he chooses to protect. Most people protect their image. They want to be liked, to be included, to be seen as successful, to avoid disappointing others. So they say yes when they want to say no. They stay in conversations that drain them. They accept invitations they don't enjoy. They give their attention away as if it costs nothing. Little by little, they become exhausted without understanding why. A deep-thinking man eventually learns a different lesson. He realizes that his greatest resource is not his time, it is his energy. Time can be scheduled, money can be earned again, but scattered attention is much harder to recover. Once your mind is constantly pulled in a dozen different directions, it loses the clarity that makes deep thinking valuable in the first place. That is why mature deep thinkers become selective, not because they believe they are better than other people, but because they understand that everything they say yes to requires them to say no to something else. Seneca expressed this truth with remarkable clarity. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. Most people interpret that lesson as a lesson about productivity. It is actually a lesson about attention. Every unnecessary commitment, every meaningless argument, every relationship that survives only because you are afraid to let it end, quietly steals pieces of your life. A deep-thinking man begins to notice this. He notices how certain environments leave him mentally heavy, how some conversations produce nothing but noise, how constantly explaining himself to people who refuse to understand is one of the fastest ways to waste emotional energy. So he becomes comfortable disappointing expectations. He no longer feels guilty for protecting his peace. He doesn't attend every battle simply because someone invited him to fight. He doesn't respond to every criticism. He doesn't chase every opportunity. And most importantly, he doesn't confuse being available with being valuable. This often surprises people. Those who once expected unlimited access to his time suddenly call him distant. Some even mistake his boundaries for arrogance. But boundaries are not walls. They are filters. They determine what deserves entry into your life and what does not. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts." If that is true, then protecting your attention is not selfish. It is an act of responsibility. Because whatever repeatedly occupies your mind eventually shapes your character. This is why deep-thinking men become increasingly intentional as they mature. They choose books over endless scrolling, meaningful conversations over constant socializing, purpose over popularity, depth over distraction. Not because they dislike people, but because they understand that a distracted mind slowly loses its ability to see clearly. There is another reason this matters. When a man stops trying to protect his image, he also stops living for other people's approval. He no longer needs everyone to understand him. He no longer explains every decision. He no longer feels compelled to defend every boundary. His actions begin to speak louder than his explanations. Ironically, this quiet confidence often earns more respect than endless self-promotion ever could, because people instinctively trust someone who is not constantly trying to impress them. The Stoics understood that dignity is built in silence far more often than in performance. A man who protects his energy is not withdrawing from life. He is choosing where his life will be invested. And once he learns to value his energy, he discovers something even more powerful. Sometimes the strongest thing he can do is remain silent. Because silence, when used wisely, is never empty. It is where wisdom takes shape. And that leads us to the fourth truth.
Truth number 4. Silence is where they build their strength. In a world that rewards constant noise, silence has become deeply misunderstood. People assume that the loudest person is the most confident. The quickest response is the smartest one. The man who always has something to say must surely know what he's talking about. But a deep-thinking man sees silence differently. To him, silence is not the absence of thought. It is the place where thought becomes clear. He understands that every unnecessary word carries a cost. Every emotional reaction leaves a mark. Every careless opinion has consequences. That is why he rarely feels the need to speak immediately. Not because he has nothing to say, but because he knows that timing often matters just as much as truth. Epictetus offered a simple reminder that has survived nearly 2,000 years. Be mostly silent, or speak only what is necessary and in few words. At first glance, this sounds like advice for conversation. It is actually advice for life. Silence creates distance between stimulus and response. And inside that distance, wisdom has room to appear. Most people experience an emotion and immediately become that emotion. They feel anger, so they speak angrily. They feel fear, so they make fearful decisions. They feel excitement, so they overcommit. Their emotions become their actions before reason has a chance to intervene. A deep-thinking man trains himself differently. He lets the emotion arrive. He acknowledges it, but he refuses to hand over the steering wheel. He knows that feelings are real. They are simply not always reliable guides. So instead of reacting, he reflects. Instead of defending himself immediately, he asks whether a response is even necessary. Instead of filling every silence, he allows silence to do part of the work. This is one of the greatest forms of emotional discipline. Not suppressing emotion, not pretending not to care, but refusing to become a prisoner of the first feeling that enters the room. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. He reminded himself that the mind always has the power to choose its response, regardless of what happens outside. That is why Stoicism is often misunderstood. It does not teach emotional numbness. It teaches emotional leadership. There is a profound difference. Deep thinkers often need solitude for the same reason athletes need recovery. Not because they are weak, because they are processing more. Every conversation, every observation, every decision, every contradiction. Their minds continue working long after the world has moved on. Without quiet moments, that mental activity eventually becomes noise instead of insight. This is why many deep-thinking men naturally withdraw for a while after periods of intense activity. Other people sometimes interpret this as isolation, or moodiness, or emotional distance. But most of the time, it is neither. It is maintenance. Just as a sword must be sharpened after repeated use, the mind must also be sharpened through reflection. Seneca understood the importance of retreat when he wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." Notice what he did not say. He never suggested surrounding yourself with constant company. Sometimes the person who most needs your attention is yourself. Because without regular self-reflection, you slowly begin living according to other people's expectations instead of your own principles. Silence protects you from that. It gives you space to hear your own convictions before the world's opinions drown them out. It reminds you what truly matters, what deserves your effort, and what deserves to be released. Ironically, the men who are most comfortable with silence often become the ones whose words carry the greatest weight. People listen more carefully because they know he is not speaking to impress. He is speaking because he has something worth saying. That is the quiet authority deep thinkers develop over time. Not authority built on volume, but authority built on restraint. Yet silence teaches one lesson that changes the way a man sees the world forever. The more time he spends observing,
the more he realizes that people cannot be understood by their actions alone. To understand someone, you must first understand the circumstances shaping those actions. And that brings us to the fifth truth. Truth number 5. They see context before they judge character. One of the quietest strengths of a deep-thinking man is that he rarely rushes to judge people. Most people judge behavior. A deep-thinking man looks for the conditions that created the behavior. He understands that actions rarely exist on their own. Every decision has a history. Every reaction has a cause. Every person is carrying a story that cannot be seen at first glance. That doesn't mean every action is acceptable. It simply means that understanding always comes before judgment. This is one of the greatest differences between wisdom and assumption. When someone becomes distant, most people immediately make it personal. They don't respect me. They've changed. They never cared. A deep-thinking man asks different questions. What might this person be carrying? What pressure are they under? What happened before this moment that I cannot see? He knows that people are rarely defined by a single moment. A man who is patient today may become impatient tomorrow because life has exhausted him. A loyal friend may suddenly disappear, not because loyalty vanished, but because survival became his first priority. A confident person may become withdrawn after one painful experience. Character matters, but context often explains what character alone cannot. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Whenever someone has done wrong, immediately consider what view of good or evil could have led them to do it. Once you understand that, you will feel pity rather than anger." Notice what he is saying. He is not asking us to excuse harmful behavior. He is asking us to understand it, because understanding frees the mind from unnecessary resentment. Most people carry anger because they only see the outcome. They never stop long enough to examine the process that produced it. Deep thinkers naturally do. That is why they often appear remarkably calm in situations where others become emotional. They recognize that human beings are inconsistent, not because they are evil, but because they are imperfect. Fear changes people. Success changes people. Loss changes people. Time changes people. The man who understands this stops expecting permanent certainty from temporary circumstances. Instead of asking, "Why did this person disappoint me?" he begins asking, "What changed in their life that changed their behavior?" That shift transforms the way he experiences relationships. He becomes less reactive, less offended, less eager to label people as toxic simply because they disappointed him. Modern culture encourages simple labels, good or bad, right or wrong, friend or enemy. But real life is rarely that simple. Deep thinkers become comfortable living inside complexity. They understand that someone can love you and still fail you. Someone can have good intentions and still make harmful decisions. Someone can care deeply and still lack the emotional capacity to show it consistently. Recognizing these truths doesn't make a man naive, it makes him realistic. At the same time, deep thinkers learn another important lesson. Understanding someone's pain does not obligate you to carry it. Compassion does not require self-sacrifice. You can understand why someone behaves the way they do and still decide that they no longer belong in your life. This is where empathy and boundaries begin working together. Seneca expressed this beautifully when he wrote, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness." Kindness, however, is not the same as unlimited tolerance. A wise man can forgive without forgetting. He can understand without surrendering his peace. He can wish someone well while recognizing that walking separate paths is sometimes the healthiest choice. That balance is difficult to master
Many people become either cold or careless. Deep thinkers strive for something different: clear eyes, an open heart, and firm boundaries. Ironically, the more deeply they understand human nature, the less they expect perfection from anyone, including themselves. But this gift comes with a hidden cost, because once you begin seeing patterns behind people's behavior, you also begin seeing patterns within society itself. You notice contradictions, empty success, false values, comfortable lies. And once you see those patterns, it becomes almost impossible to live as though they don't exist. That realization leads us to the sixth truth.
Truth number 6. Seeing too much makes comfort impossible. There comes a moment in every deep-thinking man's life when he realizes he can no longer pretend not to see what he has already seen. At first, it happens quietly. You begin noticing small contradictions. People speak about honesty, yet reward deception. They praise discipline, yet celebrate comfort. They admire integrity until integrity becomes inconvenient. Most people glance at these contradictions and move on. A deep-thinking man cannot. His mind keeps returning to them, not because he enjoys being cynical, but because truth refuses to leave him alone. This is the hidden cost of awareness. The more clearly you see the world, the harder it becomes to accept comforting illusions. Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world." Most people believe the world is exactly as they perceive it. A deep-thinking man knows better. He understands that reality is always larger, more complicated, and often more uncomfortable than appearances suggest. That realization changes him. He stops measuring success by applause because he has seen too many celebrated people living empty lives. He stops envying status because he has seen powerful men imprisoned by their own ambitions. He stops chasing approval because he has watched people change their opinions with every passing trend. Little by little, his standards begin coming from within instead of the crowd. This is why deep-thinking men often feel out of place, not because they believe they are superior, but because they struggle to participate in conversations that never move beyond the surface. While everyone else debates appearances, their minds drift toward causes. While others chase attention, they search for meaning. While others ask, "How can I get more?" they quietly ask, "What actually matters?" That question changes everything, because once purpose enters your life, distraction loses much of its power. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "If you seek tranquility, do less, but do what is essential." Notice that he didn't say, "Do nothing." He said, "Do what is essential." Awareness naturally strips away the unnecessary. Not overnight, but gradually. The opinions you once obsessed over become irrelevant. The competitions you once wanted to win begin to feel meaningless. The expectations you carried for years slowly lose their grip. You start simplifying your life, not because you lack ambition, but because you finally understand where your energy belongs. Of course, this kind of awareness has a danger of its own. When you see enough injustice, enough hypocrisy, enough wasted potential, it becomes easy to grow bitter. Some men mistake awareness for pessimism. They believe that seeing flaws is the same as possessing wisdom. It isn't. Anyone can criticize, very few people can build. A truly deep-thinking man eventually understands that awareness is not the destination. It is an invitation. An invitation to create what the world is missing, to become what he wishes he had found, to live according to principles instead of complaints. Because seeing the problem is only the first step. The greater challenge is becoming part of the solution. That is where depth becomes purpose, and purpose transforms awareness into strength. But purpose alone is not enough. Even the clearest vision will eventually collapse without structure. A man may know exactly who he wants to become, yet never become that man if his daily life has no framework to support his ideals. That is why the deepest thinkers eventually discover one final truth. They don't build their lives on motivation, they build them on systems.
Truth number 7. They build systems, not motivation. Most people spend their lives chasing motivation. They wait until they feel inspired. They wait until they feel confident. They wait until they feel ready. And while they wait, their goals remain exactly where they started. A deep-thinking man eventually discovers a difficult truth. Motivation is one of the least reliable forces in human life. It rises with emotion. It disappears with discomfort. It follows your mood instead of your mission. If your life depends on motivation, your progress will always be unpredictable. That is why deep thinkers stop asking, "How do I stay motivated?" Instead, they ask, "What kind of system makes the right action inevitable?" This is where deep thinking reaches its highest form, not in collecting more knowledge, but in creating a structure that turns knowledge into action. Because information alone changes nothing. Insight alone changes nothing. Even wisdom changes nothing unless it becomes behavior. Epictetus understood this perfectly when he wrote, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." That single sentence separates thinkers from builders. Many people enjoy discussing discipline. Few organize their lives around it. Many admire wisdom. Few build routines that allow wisdom to guide their daily choices. Deep-thinking men eventually realize that a brilliant idea has very little value if it never leaves the mind. Thought must become structure. Structure must become action. Action must become character. And character, repeated over years, becomes destiny. This is why truly disciplined men often appear surprisingly ordinary. Their strength is rarely found in dramatic moments. It is found in quiet consistency, in the way they begin each morning, in the standards they refuse to compromise, in the promises they keep to themselves when no one is watching. Those invisible systems shape their lives far more than occasional bursts of inspiration ever could. Marcus Aurelius did not become resilient because he waited to feel strong. He became resilient because he practiced returning to reason every single day. The Stoics never believed that excellence was an event. They believed it was a discipline. That is why the deepest thinkers eventually stop relying on motivation. They build systems. They create principles. They design environments that make the right choices easier and the wrong choices harder. And over time, something remarkable happens. The mind that once felt overwhelmed by endless thoughts begins to feel directed. Awareness turns into action. Action turns into momentum. Momentum turns into identity. And the man who once felt trapped inside his own mind becomes the master of it. And perhaps that is the greatest truth of all. The goal was never to think less. It was to learn how to carry your depth with discipline, purpose, and self-mastery. That is where our final reflection begins. Final thought. Your depth is your responsibility. If there's one lesson these 7 truths have been pointing toward, it is this. Deep thinking has never been your problem. The real question is whether you allow your depth to become your prison or your greatest source of strength. Many men spend their entire lives trying to silence their minds. They wish they could care less, feel less, question less, notice less. But the Stoics never taught us to escape our nature. They taught us to master it. Your ability to see beneath the surface is not something to apologize for. Your habit of questioning before acting is not weakness. Your need for solitude is not failure, and your search for meaning is certainly not a flaw. These qualities become dangerous only when they are left without direction, because awareness without discipline becomes anxiety. Reflection without action becomes hesitation. Knowledge without purpose becomes a burden. But when awareness is guided by wisdom, when discipline gives structure to thought, and when purpose gives meaning to every decision, your depth stops working against you. It begins working for you. Marcus Aurelius left us with a reminder that captures this perfectly. Look well into thyself. There is a source of strength which will always spring up, if thou wilt always look. Real strength has never come from thinking more than everyone else. It comes from knowing yourself more honestly than yesterday. That is the quiet path of Stoicism, not becoming someone else, but becoming the highest version of who you already are. Thank you for watching Stoic Wisdom today. So now I'd like to hear from you. Which of these 7 truths described you the most? Was it learning to question yourself, protect your energy, embrace silence, or build systems instead of relying on motivation? Share your answer in the comments. Your experience may become the insight another man needs to hear today. And if this video gave you a new perspective on your own mind, subscribe to our channel. Every week, we explore timeless Stoic philosophy, psychology, and practical wisdom to help thoughtful men develop clarity, discipline, and self-mastery in a world that often rewards the opposite. Until next time, keep your mind clear, keep your principles steady, and remember, the deepest minds don't change the world because they think differently. They change it because they choose to live differently.